For those that are new to our Friday edition of Office Hours, this is our open Q&A session. And our goal is just if you have questions on a trailhead badge, stuck on something on like a super badge, you just need a nudge in the right direction. You have something at work that's a challenge that you're just looking for a second set of eyes on. Any of those things. We are, we have a wide range of experience on this call. So if you have questions, all that I ask you to do is just raise your hand using the little icon down there in the toolbar, and we'll go through them. So with that, does anybody have any questions or topics that they would like to go through today? Shiba, yeah. I think it might be on mute if you're talking.
Oh no, I always forget I'm on virtual call.
No worries.
Okay, so I have a guest, like I'm building a Experience Cloud site, and on that I have a guest book. So on that guest book, can we put a tracking field or a hidden field to indicate that the contact is coming from a certain form, and then create a list view based on that? So that form is actually built on a flow. And so is it possible to put that tracking field or hidden field on the flow to indicate that the contact is coming from a certain form?
Yeah, I think so. Well, let me step back. I think I have an idea about how we might accomplish that. Does anybody else have any feedback about how you might do that? So you have a screen flow on an Experience Cloud site, and when a contact is created through that, you just want to be able to differentiate between the contacts that have been created in the system through whatever other means versus the ones that got created through this form. Does that sound about right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess the simplest approach that I could see is that if you did create a field, and let's just say, again, we're talking about the contact object. If you created a field on the contact object, maybe you use the lead source, or maybe you use a custom field that you would create. But anyway, when you're creating the contact as part of your flow, you can just make sure that that field gets set. You don't need to expose it to the user. It's something you can set like outside of the form after they've hit next or hit save. The next step would be like an assignment block that would actually fill in that field, and then you would insert the record. Does that make sense, or?
No, I'm not sure on that. Should I share screen to show
Yeah,
my?
sure. Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen. Yep.
Okay. So this is my screen flow with
Yep.
the form. And
Okay.
yeah,
So
this is the builder.
yeah. So if you look at the flow that you have here, you have your screen block where you're asking them to enter in all the various fields as part of the form, and then in the very next step, you're creating the contact. What I'm suggesting that you do is in between the screen and the contact, or even right here, you could do it right there on that create screen. Just add another line item there that is setting a field to like the lead or contact source or lead source or whatever the field is that you would create. Just set it right there to whatever value that you would like it. Now, lead might not make sense because we're creating contacts, but yeah, but if you created a field like a contact source or was created through the Experience Cloud as a checkbox, whatever field that you would create, you would just set it in this step right here. You don't expose it to them in the screen, but you just set it as part of that create step right there.
Right, and then what would come here?
Whatever you would like it to be. So in other words, like if you created a field called was created through Experience Cloud as like a checkbox field, you would just put true in there. If you created a pick list field that was like a contact creation source, you would have various entries in that pick list. One of them might have been Experience Cloud form, and then you could just set it. You would be able to just select it from there. So it depends on what kind of field that you create. So if it's a checkbox, you would just put true. If it was a pick list, you would just set whatever the value you created for this. Yeah.
And then how do you make it hidden?
You don't have to make it hidden. In other words, like if you created a field called contact source, you would add all the field level security, all that stuff that you need to do to
Okay.
grant permission to people. But as far as making it hidden through the form, you don't have to because on your screen you're displaying very specific fields there. You just got to make sure you just don't display this one.
Okay. I got that. Thank you.
Yeah, and as always, once you get a chance to kind of dig into it and go through it, if you have any questions, hit us up on our Slack workspace, which I will share a link to right now in case anybody has not yet joined our Slack workspace. So I'll throw that in the chat. All right. Anybody have any questions on that one or before we move on? All right, Sandy, I see you have a cat and your hand up.
She's very demanding. So approval processes. I have a question on that. Is there a way to make it so that before whoever is assigned as the approver or whomever ends up doing it, is there a way to prevent them from approving it before other things get done? Like actually reviewing it and changing a field to a certain setting or a certain value or something like that. Is there any way to accomplish that?
So if I say that back to you, you have an approval process. Let's, if just to be specific, let's just say that we had an opportunity approval process that we're putting in place where it needs to be submitted for approval if the amount was greater than like $1 million, right? So an opportunity is created for more than $1 million. It goes through the approval process, goes to approver like A, whoever it is. And you want to make sure that not only have they looked at that opportunity, but they've actually went onto like a field there that says, I reviewed the opportunity and they checked it. And only then would they be able to approve the opportunity.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts before I fumble my way through one of my least knowledgeable parts of the platform? Somebody mentioned the validation rule. So I guess the question with validation rules is always, what are we putting the validation rule on? So it's got to be on some kind of field or something like that. So
the problem with the validation rule is that the approval actually lives on a different object and you cannot put validation rules on that. And then I tried doing the validation rule on the object that I had it on, and it didn't prevent it from being updated.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but during the approval process, there are steps in there that it's like a final approval steps, like things you can do once it's approved. You can like set fields or update values and things like that, right?
Right.
Could you, in theory, let's just say you had a checkbox called I reviewed it, and then you had another checkbox on there that was called approved, right? So if you put a validation rule on the approved checkbox, that's part of the completion actions of the approval that said, if you try to check this approval box without that I reviewed it checkbox being true, it'd fire a validation rule. So I wonder if that would fail the approval because that box wasn't checked yet.
So essentially, I think I tried something similar because what I did was I said that if the status is it's a case. So if the status is an escalated case and they try to change it and this field is blank or null, or I think because it's a pick list, so I think it is blank, it should throw the validation error because, in the approval process, it updates the status once it's approved.
Yeah.
So I tried it. I tried it manually, changing status manually. The validation error, fired off, so I knew it was working. And then I went and I clicked the approve button without keeping that field blank, and it approved it, updated the status, and did all of it. So,
sorry, I wanted to ask: do you currently have any triggers on your case subject?
What do you mean?
Oh, sorry, this is like a developer question, so pardon me if so a trigger is something that fires when, for example, a record is being updated. So you can have a trigger on case, for example, to check what is called before updates. So it checks the status of the case before you update it, and you have access to the record itself and all the fields, so you can do like a check here. But you can just simply write a simple trigger if you already use triggers, but that's more like a developer kind of thing. So I don't know if you have experience with that.
So let me try to say that back to you. So essentially, are you asking that instead of a validation rule, could we just do this with a trigger where it checks whatever criteria and then puts like an add error on that record if you try to approve it without that field being set? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean that could be an option as well. And let's just see here. I wonder if we can just walk through this very quickly to see, just in case folks aren't too familiar with approval processes. All right, so I'm logged into Salesforce here. I want to go to Setup, and let's focus on the case object for right now, since you mentioned that's the one that you're working with. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to our case object, and let's just get ourselves set up here so that we can actually test this. So I'm going to go to Edit Page, and I'm going to try to remove all the junk that we don't need here. So let's put the details up here. God. Okay, there we go. So we got details. And then I don't want any of this other stuff here. Let's get rid of all that. And then let's add a related list single, which is going to be our approval history so that we can submit it for approval and all that good stuff. Not activity history, we want approval history. Okay, now it's saying it can't be displayed because it's not on the page layout, which we will take care of in a second here. All right, so I'm going to activate this page. Assign as org default. Next, save. Okay, so that error message that we're getting there can't be displayed because it's not on the page layout. So let's actually take care of that real quick. So I'm going to save our Lightning page. This will drop us back onto the case page that we started from. And from here, I'm just going to go up to the gear icon and go to Edit Object. That'll take us into Setup with the case object already kind of in focus here on the Object Manager tab. And I'm just going to go to Case Page Layout. I'm assuming it's this one, but I always click on that Page Layout Assignment button, and you'll get an idea of what all the assignments are. Yep, so it is the case layout. And from here, let's just add on our related list. So we have approval history. We'll throw that thing on there. I don't think we have to add any other fields here. No, it's good. All right, so that kind of sets it up so that we can actually walk through approvals on the case object. So if I go and I refresh my page, we should see that approval history, and then we can jump into creating the actual approval. All right, so from within setup, if I go to the Home tab and we just go to approval processes, then we can select what object that we're working on approvals on. So I'll select case. Doesn't look like we have any right now. And this thing, again, I never know which is which. So let's just go with that one. Eventually, we just want to get to the point where we can click save, and then you can edit everything in one place. So we're going to call this test case approval. I don't have an email, so that's fine. Use this approval process of any or the following. I guess I can leave that blank and submit it manually, I guess. Okay, so I'll do that. What's this here? Okay, so let submitter automatically assign approval using manager field. That's fine. Okay, so we're just going to go to the detail page. Now, here is just the basic approval that we have set up here on the case object now. So the initial submission action, it's going to lock the record. It's going to submit it to whoever the manager is for approval. And then this is what we were talking about before, that once the record is approved, it can do these final actions. And you can put all kinds of stuff in here like email alerts. You can create a task. You can update fields, and you can even send information to external systems as well. So what I was proposing is that if we had a field, and let's just think through this here. Let's say, let's just create a few fields on the case just to kind of test this out. So if we went to our case object, and let's create 2 checkbox fields. Let's do one called was reviewed, which is going to be unchecked by default. We'll give this to, I still have this stupid, well, I know I have one of these, so let's just add it to both of them. Okay, so we'll add it to our permission sets. We'll throw it on the layout, and then I'll create another field here, which is going to be a checkbox as well. And actually, you know what? I'm going to make this a date time field. And I'll explain why in a second here, but we'll call this approved date time. Okay. And we'll check that. Next. And save. Okay. So now we have those two fields. Let's go back to our approval process. And what I would like to do is that when this is approved, one of the final actions that I want to take is to set the date in that approved date time. All right, so I'm going to add a new field update, and we'll say set approved date / time. And the field update is going to be approved date time. We're going to use a formula, show formula editor, and I have no idea what it is. I think there's a now option here. So it returns the date time representing the current moment. So we'll just set it to the current moment, whatever that is. And that's it. So once it's approved, it'll unlock the record. Actually, what are we doing here? We're locking the record from being edited, and then we're setting the date time field, the approved date time field. All right, now, so if we think about how we want this to work, we want to check to make sure that the was reviewed was true before we're allowed to actually approve this. Once the record's approved, we're trying to set that approved date time. So what I would like to do is put a validation rule on this, that if the record's being edited and we're trying to set the approved date time, the reviewed checkbox has to be true. All right, so that's the theory that we're trying to test out here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our case, and let's add a validation rule, and then we can see what happens here. So on the case object, we'll go to validation rules, create new, and say case must be reviewed before approval. All right, so we're going to say there is an advanced formula here called is changed. So we're going to say if you're trying to change the approved date time field, and actually let's use the prettier end. So let's say and. So we're going to say if the approved date time is changed and the was reviewed. No, was reviewed is a checkbox. So I can say is equal to false, or we can say not was reviewed, or there's a couple ways you can do it here, but let's just say was reviewed equals false. So whenever I create a validation rule, I always have to kind of say it out loud. And I have to say the fact that when this evaluates the true, it's going to throw the error. So we want to throw an error if we're trying to change the approval date time and was reviewed is equal to false. That's going to throw the error message. All right, so the error is you can't approve before you review chump. And we'll put that at the top of the page. All right, so we'll save that. All right, so we save that. That's active now. Let's jump back to our approval process now. So with no other changes here, with that validation rule in place, in theory, if I try to approve a case right now, knowing that that was reviewed is going to be false because we're not going to set it in this step, so we're not going to set it manually, it should throw the error when I try to approve this record. That's the theory. And before we try to test that theory, always remember to activate your approvals and flows and things before testing. It's always good. So I'll activate that. And now we should be in a position to test this out. All right, so I'm going to go back to my case. I'm going to give this a quick refresh. And I should be able to submit this manually. I know I didn't enter any kind of start criteria. Maybe I can't. Let's go back here. So initial submission, entry criteria. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my entry criteria to, can I cheat like this and just say true? I don't know if that'll work or not. Okay, so if I go back here, I should see that approval mechanism here where I can submit this for approval. And I'm not. So any thoughts as to why I wouldn't see that submit for approval button here on the record? Or maybe I'm looking in the wrong spot. Submit for approval. Please approve. Whereas the next approver by the manager field, that's empty. Okay, so I guess it would be my manager field that I have to update. So let's go to settings, user advanced, and I'm assuming there's a manager. Where is my manager? Maybe I have to do it. Advanced details.
Would it be in your user record?
Yeah, I think I was looking in the simple version of that page, which doesn't include the manager field. So I'm just looking at here. There it is. I guess it won't have. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, so I guess I am in here. Save. Does it say I can't be my own manager? Okay, so I'm sorry. Let's just go back here. So let's just say we don't want to do manager. We just want to pick it manually. All right. So right here in our approval steps, we have step 1 for approval. It's going to go to the assigned approvers. It's going to be the manager. So I'm going to edit that, and let's just select the much simpler manually select option here. So all records should enter the step next, and we are going to let the submitter choose automatically or manually. Okay, so after all that fumbling around, in theory now, I should be able to go back to our case record, and let's see if we can now submit this case for approval. All right, so we go and submit for approval. Please approve. Jump. Okay, it's going to ask me who the approval is. I should be able to select myself, and let's submit. Okay, so submitted for approval. If we look at our approval history now, we can see that it was submitted. It's pending approval for me since I selected myself as the approver. And now the moment of truth, right? If I click approve, it's going to try to update the approved date time field. And in theory, it should throw an error because that was reviewed as still false. All right, so I'm going to click approve. This is approved. Approve. And it looks like it approved. And if we look at our approved date time, that was clearly set, and the was reviewed was false. So it looks like approvals completely bypassed the validation rule. So I think validation rule is out. So the other option that was brought up was to use a trigger. So before I start typing code in developer console, let's just think through, is there any other options that we can do here? Let's look at the approval process itself. So approval steps, I wonder, can you add it as an approval step? Like, is there anything in here that I missed that you can say all should enter this step? So this is basically should it even go to this step. So if we put criteria here, I think it's just going to bypass the approval altogether. I don't think it's going to do anything there. That's the approver. So yeah, nothing in here. Yeah, that's a good question. So approval processes bypass validation rules.
Kind of annoying, huh?
Yeah.
Is the person who reviewed that and the person approved is the same person?
So Sandy, who's reviewing it and who's approving it, I guess wouldn't necessarily matter so much just because eventually it's going to go to approval.
I don't think it should.
Yeah, I guess you could have something where at the beginning you say you can't even submit it for approval until something happens, but it's the approver that you want to do something. So I don't think that would work.
No. And then, of course,
Yeah.
the other thing is that the other thing that's kind of annoying about approval processes is if you have a system admin profile, that even if it's not assigned to you, you can approve it.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yes, that's right. So what I did is that I would use other person to test it out.
Yeah, I think
Right.
we're going to run into the same issue though, even if we had separate users for testing.
Yeah, because what
Um,
I basically did the same thing, just different fields in the org I have, and I did log in as a different person to approve it. And it went through just fine bypassing the validation rule.
okay, so I'm going to time box what I'm about to do for 4 minutes. If we go over 4 minutes, we're gonna cut it off. But just to see if we put any trigger on here on the case object, I'm curious if it would just fire that error. Here, let's make sure we have a case created before I go adding triggers onto the case object. But let's just see if that suggestion works here. So let's go to this one here. And let's go back into developer console. And again, somebody has a timer, you can start it now. So we'll do new. This is going to be case error trigger. So we're just going to force an error on any update to the case object. Not the case change event, but case submit. Okay, and we're going to say for case C in trigger.new. So basically for every case that gets changed, we are going to do c.add error. You can't update cases, shump. Okay, so that should do it. And we want to do this after update. What's the chance I got that right on the first try? Let's see. Okay, so there we go. We got a case trigger in place now that for every case that gets updated, it's going to add an error to it. So now if we go into our case object, which was right here, I'm going to submit for approval. Please approve, submit. We're going to select me again. Okay, case was submitted for approval, pending status. Right now, you can see the approval date time is still blank. And now when I try to approve, looks good. Approve. So that could be an option. So that looks like it's preventing it from being approved because we have that trigger in place. So that's definitely an option. Of course, that comes with the headache of having to write a trigger. And of course, this logic, this is just adding an error to every change. We'd have to put in something like if is, basically it is the equivalent of a trigger is changed here for a daytime approval and the reviewer is false, then throw an error. So programmatically, it can be done. But that's kind of ugly to have to deal with that.
So that's what I was kind of saying. If a trigger already exists, so you can just add that to it rather than. But if not, it can be headache having to manage Apex code.
Yeah. No, it's technically a relatively new org. They had tried it before and then just having Salesforce before and it didn't work out. And then they decided to get the Salesforce CPQ. So we kind of rebuilt some of that non-CPQ side stuff for them. And one of the things is that the cases, and just while they were testing it out and stuff, playing with it, they made the comment that, oh, I updated it, but the customer service person can't go back in there because the record is still locked. And, or I had it set so that they couldn't do a certain part of it until other aspects were completed if it had to go to approval. And so because they didn't make those updates themselves when they were clicking approve, that kind of hit a snag. But it was also in, the play where it's like, you're not really serious because it's not a real case. It's not real money. It's not real issues. And so I also suggested, I'm like, well, just know that that's part of the process. If it's going for approval, you have to do this step, then approve it.
Yeah.
It could just be a business process solution as opposed to a Salesforce.
Yeah. Usually we're going to solve the problem through training is not the best approach because people never follow that.
Well, I mean, considering the fact that the person who did it is the owner of the company and the one who hired us, I think that he should be okay.
I'm going to stop you right there. I have Steve on the call who works with me, and he can attest to the fact that I am the worst at following my own rules. So yeah, the whole owner of the company who hired me, I don't think that works.
Well, it's basically supposed to be if there is the amount at risk is over $1,000, he's supposed to look at the case. So I would think that since it's money involved, maybe
I don't know,
a higher
but
likelihood, not necessarily guaranteed, but maybe like 6% instead of 5%.
yeah, the only other thing I was thinking that we constantly run into this kind of challenge that there's a limitation to Salesforce flows where you can't in a record triggered flow add an error to a record. And that's it's like one of the best things you can do within a trigger that doesn't exist right now within flow. And I have to wonder if somebody might have created like an invocable action that you can just, through your flow, if you do want to throw an error, you just call that invocable action with the record ID, and it would just add the error to the record for you. Maybe something like that exists, and if it doesn't exist, I think that would be relatively easy to put together. But kind of bridging the gap between flows and triggers just to be able to add an error to a record.
Well, and I know like one of the other thoughts I had, or like one of the solutions I said was or saw was something about creating the approval process as a screen flow instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then the only issue I see there is then I can't have the approval history really sitting on that record anymore.
Well, you kind of could. You kind of could, right? Think about it like maybe like this: if a combination of a screen-based flow, field history tracking, and dynamic related list, where you can have put a related list on the screen that is the field history tracking table, like field history, but put a filter on it where it's only related to your approval field. You know what I mean? So like you could do that and filter out all the clutter just by using that field history table.
I mean, but there's also still the fact that the approver gets the notification, and if they click on it directly in there, they could still bypass all of that anyway. So
yeah, but again, if you're putting in something where if a field is set to submit for approval, like a pick list field, and you have some record triggered flow that's sending an email to whoever the approver should be with a URL that gets them to that record for their approval, and when they click on it, they land on the page, and in your dynamic actions at the top of the page, you're now showing them a button because they are the user that is the person that's listed as the approval user. So they can see that approval button now. And when they click on that, you're not doing anything through the approval process whatsoever. You're just making updates. So all your validation rules should fire, and they have to check the box first. And I mean, like I think that might be a viable option. It's a headache to have to go through all that and basically create an approval process from scratch. But I think for whatever reason, the fact that it doesn't fire validation rules, getting away from that might be a way to go.
right. At this point, we're in, just the post go live support, and I don't think there is time to build something like that.
Yeah.
As part of it. So I'm not too worried about it, but it was more of a maybe I'm missing something kind of thing. So
yeah, no, unless and again, I didn't really do a search for this, but unless there's some kind of setting that says approval processes should bypass validation rules, I never looked for that, but it might be something to look at too. So, all right. Any other questions on this topic? Went a little bit further on a tangent than I originally expected. And Steve, thank you for the countdown timer. I like that. I saw that as I stopped sharing my screen. But any questions on this before we move on? All right. So let's open it back up then. Anybody have any other questions or topics that they would like to go through for today? No questions, huh?
I'll add another one then.
Well, real quick before you add another one, I'm going through the chat here. So Rob, I saw your point there. The whole point of these calls, like I mentioned, we have a wide range of knowledge bases. People just getting started, some people working for years, and the hope is that as we go through and answer some of these more advanced questions, we try to break it down every little piece what we're doing. Add how to add fields onto the layout or how to add a validation rule. Hopefully, everybody can glean at least a little something from the explanation. So that's kind of my goal here. So yeah, don't feel bad if you're just getting started and you're not quite following all the stuff that we're going through. So
And honestly, Rob, a lot of the stuff that I come with is because throughout the week I'm attempting to find these answers myself, and either I end up spending so much time trying to figure something out that I think should be simple. That's usually what I'm trying to bring. And then but just the fact that for me, it's also the whole, I know Salesforce has so many capabilities. Sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out how to do it. So that's usually why I end up coming with these ones that might seem complex, but I think sometimes they seem complex because you don't have the frame of reference for what I'm trying to do since you weren't here. And so trying to figure out what exactly I want first, and then trying to figure out a solution too. Sometimes it's not as simple. It doesn't mean that you don't know what you're doing. It just means that you might not understand what I'm asking.
No, Sandy, I love your frame of reference point. I was thinking that the learning curve's so steep right now that it's more like rock climbing. So you guys are giving me little things I can grip onto and get my head around a little bit as I start on my journey. So thanks. I tune in and I feel like every time I do this, I'm a little more equipped.
I like the analogy, though I would say that we aim to be less of a handhold and more the safety rope to the top. So we just want to make sure you don't fall and hit the bottom. So
After that, think of it as a mental handhold then.
All right, Sandy, if you don't mind, before we go back for your question, we have a hand raised. And the first question I'm going to ask you is, how do you pronounce your name? Just so I can.
I knew that was coming. It's pronounced Oluwase.
Oluwalaje. I'm going to have to practice that a few times. I'll go back on the recording, which this call is being recorded for quality assurance and training purposes, and we'll post it on YouTube after the call. So,
all right.
What do you got? Yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes I just wonder if any other person is doing Salesforce DevOps, because I just kind of always feel alone in that space sometimes. I called Salesforce consultants into some meeting as well. They didn't really, give me as much help as I wanted.
Yeah.
We made some progress, but I mean, I'd like to know what other people are doing, pipelines, Azure CI/CD, and all of that stuff. If there's anyone else who's doing all that stuff as well.
Yeah. So let me try to ask your question in a slightly different way. And actually, before I say anything, if in your own words, what would you say is DevOps for those that might be new to the whole thing? What is DevOps?
DevOps is just like an automatic way to promote changes from dev all the way to maybe staging UAT and then to production, security testing, and all of that. Just automating all of that rather than going to create change sets directly in a UI. You can use something called pipelines. It's just a file that has instructions on what to do if you want to deploy from one state to the other.
Yeah.
And all of configure approvals, you can configure stagings and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So before I give you my take, anybody else on the call doing any kind of DevOps related work, whether it's through the new Salesforce, what's the new thing they have now, like DevOps Center, Cirrus or Cumulus, I think is the name of the product. But anybody doing any kind of DevOps right now?
I do, but I'm not a pro at it. We use Visual Studio and Bitbucket and Jira. So we have to type in commands in Visual Studio. And then we do development work in our own personal dev org. And then we push that code back up to Bitbucket for approval.
Yeah. So let me just make a statement, and then anybody can correct me if I'm wrong here. But would it be fair to say that the folks that are primarily doing DevOps are primarily focused on one singular Salesforce organization? When I say organization, I mean like a company. So in other words, that company is defined, okay, here's production, here's UAT, here's our staging, and then here's our dev environments. They're making changes and they're trying to promote them up to production. This wouldn't necessarily be something that and I could be way off here, but something that maybe an ISV that is supporting multiple customers or a consulting partner doing work for, many different customers and just as a like a part-time engagement. Is that kind of fair? Is it mostly for folks that are working within a singular kind of release organization?
I don't know because I don't have exposure to consulting work. I would presume that it would be for larger organizations that really want to be tight with their development work and they have multiple developers. So the requirements are there. So if you had a consultant company that was a larger company that you were supporting rather that had that DevOps stream or whatnot, I would just presume that you'd need to learn that process.
Yeah.
But yeah, speaking from personal, I am only supporting one large organization.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I think from my side, I'm probably not the best to answer this question. To be honest with you, as a sole developer in an ISV, capacity, I do most of the stuff manually. It just Git branches and commits. And in fact, if you look at my Git history for this week, it looks like a Windows 95, pipe screensaver. It's pretty ugly. But yeah, the CI/CD things like that, it's just not something that something I've wanted to do. It's just I haven't had the time to put it in place. But yeah. Anybody have any resources? If you had no idea what DevOps was, anybody have any good resources they can share in the chat? It'd be awesome.
I just like to throw in a comment about if you have any experience with Agile in general, you pretty quickly figure out that the way that people implement Agile is usually nothing like the blueprint for Agile about how it's supposed to go. And the same really holds true in my experience for DevOps. I haven't worked DevOps in Salesforce, but I've worked DevOps in other development shops. And again, there are certifications you can get for DevOps, but that are the ideal way of doing things, but that almost never works out because somewhere in management, somebody says, no, we're not doing that part, and we're not doing that part, and we're going to do it.
Yep.
But yeah.
Well, I don't think that was a complete answer, but I think that's the best at least I can do from my side. I will share my screen real quick. I just put this in the chat. This is what Salesforce has on here for their DevOps, and they have their DevOps Center. I think this is what I was alluding to, where a lot of the development that I do is all within VS Code on my local machine, and then I'm pushing it up to GitHub, and I'm pushing it to Scratch orgs, and I'm deploying it to dev orgs or release orgs. But this is kind of like a in one place where you can do all that stuff in the cloud using their DevOps Center. I wish I had the link. Let's see if I can just get it. Let's see. I just want to see if it has a screenshot. Of course, that doesn't have a screenshot. Well, in any case, the link is there. Take a look at it. I believe that it's out of beta now, where you can start working with this, but I don't have a lot of experience with it. So
I'm trying to learn this because this is how I found this as a supposedly listed as a solution to be able to add updates to like the standard fields or objects, because you know how like if you add a value to a pick list that's a standard field, you can't include it in a change set.
So this would be essentially, it's like if you were to just pull the changes to VS Code and then deploy it to another work like through the metadata API. So it's giving you that same capability, except you don't have to have VS Code installed. You don't have to do that. You can do it all through the UI. Yeah, I can see that.
I haven't figured it out yet because I haven't had time to look through it, but yes, I want to. That's one thing I want to try to learn a little bit.
Yeah, we've done some work. We're actually even currently using it, but sometimes, you just want to validate what you've done. You want to check with people, just like you said, just to be sure that, you're following best practices and doing it the easier way and all of that stuff. But I've done some work, and I'm happy to help anyone who needs who needs to start. Yeah,
I appreciate that. All right. Well, we have about 8 minutes left. Does anybody have any other questions or topics that they would like to go through for today?
Otherwise, I'll jump back in line. But yeah, you guys first, because I already had a long one.
All right. Hearing none. What do you got, Sandy?
So on related lists, how they have the little triangle, if you have an item in a related list on a page, so you can edit it. Is there a way to turn that off?
A triangle? Here, let me share my
It's
screen.
it's not a button, but basically it's the item in your related list, and it gives you the capability to either edit or delete.
Oh, you're talking about like a little drop down thingy on the side with like the actions.
Yes.
So for example, and these are all like you're talking about like these things?
Yep.
That's a good question. I have no idea. So let's see what we can do here. So if we go to our account page layout, and let's just keep it simple. I'm going to get rid of all this junk. Get rid of all this stuff. And let's just add a related list single onto the page. And let's look at contacts. Okay, so there's two contacts, and there's that little drop down that we're talking about there. So if you could do it, I could see it being in one or two different places. So I'm going to save this. Before I go into the more complicated route, let's just have it on the layout. And now I want to go into the account object, which is number one here. Let's go to our page layouts, and let's go to the account layout. So all of our related lists are here. So if I were to go to contacts, is there anything that we can click on here to say don't show any buttons? So if we expand this, I wonder if if we just took all those off and saved, how would that impact the way that it displays here? So I just saved again. I'm just going to click refresh, and let's just see if that thingy is still there. I think it's going to be, because I think those really control what's up here versus the row by row. So if you can't do that,
edit the search layout?
That's a good question. So yeah, let's go back there. So that would be on the contact object itself, right?
Yes.
So let's go to contact. So there's three places. I said two, but I didn't think of this one. Let's go to search layouts. And which one would it be? Because I guess these are all, they default to the default. So is it, in theory, I could just go to edit here? No customizable buttons. So does that mean that we can't dork around with the buttons that display on there just because they're not custom?
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
All right, so let's try option 3. And what I was thinking is, could we do a dynamic related list single? And if we click on this, and now we're going to use this account, let's select the contacts, and then let's just see what controls they have here. So related list type is a list or tile, so we want list. Yeah, list view action bar. I'm assuming that's this thing at the top. What is it? Doesn't look like it does anything, unless I'm missing the. Okay, so let's just leave it on, or turn it off. Related list fields, that'll control that. We got sort order. We have actions new, which I'm assuming is going to be the new button up here. Yeah, I don't think so. Or at least I have no idea how you would do that. Get rid of those record level actions on the view itself. Anybody else have any thoughts? Any other ideas how we might get rid of that little triangle button drop down thingy?
I wonder if you have to remove the edit or delete something functionality.
Yeah, I think you probably could do that, but then that would affect permissions of doing that stuff other places. And I'm guessing that it's just we want to remove it from here and not remove it overall, like from the application. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you took away like create new or edit or delete permissions, it should remove those options from it. And if there are no options, I believe that it would just remove the button altogether. But yeah, that's.
Yeah, or you could do it on the profile maybe if there's specific profiles that you didn't want them to see.
But it's not that I don't want them to be able to edit their record. I just want them to do it there.
Yeah. So we still want to maintain editability, just not from that specific space.
So essentially, because it's a CPQ function where when you've got the where it's kind of calculating the amount for a product that is itemized. If you don't do it through CPQ directly, it doesn't calculate it properly. So if you try to do inline edits, it's like it doesn't do it right. And that's why we're trying to take away that ability for them to do the inline edits and make them kind of force them to go do it through the CPQ button. But if we take away their permission to edit, then I'd be afraid it would also take it away from that aspect of it as well.
Only other option, and this is a horrible, ugly option that I'm going to suggest now, but the only other option I might think of is using the new data table component within Flow, is create a screen-based flow that kind of mimics the related list where it shows whatever fields you want, but it's not going to have any kind of buttons or anything like that on it. So that could be a way, as they say. And of course, another ugly option that really is just going way too far for such a simple thing would be, Lightning Web Components, where, there's built-in components within Lightning Web Components where you can display related lists. And I believe in that case, you have a lot more flexibility with, hiding certain portions of it and even, applying CSS classes to hide stuff and things like that. So, but again, it might be going too far for a basic thing,
And too far for my ability as well.
Well, and then again, there might be some unofficial SF thing out there that somebody has already accomplished it. So, yeah. Well, with that, unfortunately, that would be, we're almost at 1 o'clock here. I do want to thank everybody for joining the call today. I do also want to let you know that next week I'm going to be leaving for vacation. And then the week after that, I will be on vacation. So we're going to have 2 weeks of no Friday office hours. So
you're not going to let Steve run it?
Well, if he wants to volunteer to run it, he sure can. But I was going to give him a break too. So, so what we can do, I'll, obviously, for the next call, you'll receive notifications on Friday that it's been canceled and canceled the week after. But you'll get the notification both through Slack as well as email for the 2 weeks after when we're going to start. So, hope everybody has a great couple of weeks. And if we didn't get to anything or you have any other questions, hit me up on Slack. Otherwise, thank you all. Hope you all have a great weekend.